You can almost feel the desperation in Captain Dougal Morrison's frantic SOS today. Due to sink at any time now. For God's sake, send help. Captain Morrison was quite literally engaged in a fight for his life. A killer nor'easter lashed at his ship, tossing it recklessly in the frigid waters of Lake Michigan. The ship had lost its power. It had sprung a terrible leak, taken on water, and was listing badly. Morrison's crew worked bravely, battling both the elements and the mortal fear that help would not arrive in time. Nearly 5 hours later, the ship succumbed to the forces of nature. By that time, help had indeed arrived, but not in time to save the ship or 16 of the 75 men on board. The ship was the SS Wisconsin. The date was October 29, 1929, the same day that the stock market crashed. And the events that took place during the early morning hours of the Wisconsin's last voyage are now legendary in the colorful, if tragic, history of Lake Michigan's shipwrecks. We'll travel back to that fateful night. We'll look at what happened to the Wisconsin and why it happened. We'll also journey with a crew of professional divers to the wreckage, which has remained virtually unchanged from the time it went down over 60 years ago. We'll be looking at the way legends are made. Lake Michigan has claimed its share of famous shipwrecks. In less than a 2-month period in the fall of 1929 alone, 4 acclaimed ships were lost in tempests on the lake. It is a lake known for its storms, virtually unparalleled in their ferocity. Maritime lore is filled with accounts of deathly northeasters, with their towering gray beards, waves reaching 20 feet or more, cutting across the width of the lake, accompanied by slicing winds and torrential rains. The floor of the lake is littered with the victims of such storms. Their hulking remains are well preserved in waters that stay in the 35 to 50 degree temperature range. Ironically, the SS Wisconsin was one of the best equipped ships of its time in terms of its ability to take on the forces of nature. Designed by Frank E. Kirby, the top Great Lakes naval architect of his day, the Wisconsin was built in 1881 and intended for year-round use as a cargo vessel traveling between Milwaukee and Grand Haven, Michigan. With its hull of Swedish iron, the 203-foot-long, 1,181-ton ship was highly regarded as the strongest and heaviest ship on the Great Lakes. It was a ship designed to take on the elements, including the harsh Great Lakes winters. With its rounded forefront and full entrance, the Wisconsin was capable of sliding onto ice and crushing it with its weight. Its design and sturdiness were soon tested in the winter of 1885. The bitter winter weather trapped the Wisconsin sister ship, the Michigan, on an ice field off the shores of Grand Haven, Michigan, and after a 3-week struggle, the Michigan's hull was crushed and she was never seen again. The Wisconsin fared better, though the winter took its toll on this ship as well. The structural damage to the ship suffered as a result of the brutal weather required extensive repair work. The ship's early years found the Wisconsin's ownership changing hands on 2 occasions. First when Goodrich Company its original owner sold the ship to the Detroit, Grand Haven, and Milwaukee Railway in 1883. And then when it was sold to the E.G. Crosby Company in 1896. 2 years after purchasing the Wisconsin, Crosby renamed it the Naomi in honor of his daughter. Once again, the ship's durability was put to the test. On May 21st, 1907, the Naomi caught fire in the middle of the lake. Crosby had converted the freighter into a passenger steamer shortly after he bought the ship, and the fire consumed its entire wooden superstructure. With the fire burning out of control and the passengers panicking, all seemed lost until a freighter, the SS Curry, arrived on the scene. In a last-ditch effort to save passengers trapped on the Naomi's after end, the Curry pushed its nose into the Naomi's stern, and passengers leaped from the stricken vessel onto the deck of the rescue ship. Considering the extent of the fire and the fact that the ship was far from shore when the fire broke out, it seems miraculous that only 5 people perished in the blaze. The Naomi was towed to shore, a burned-out shell, its superstructure reduced to a mass of twisted metal. The ship's life, however, was far from over. The superstructure was rebuilt, complete with luxurious cabins and halls, and it continued to serve its owners well under several different names. In the next 2 decades, including a stint as a hospital ship during World War I. As fate would have it, and fate seems to play a great role in the story of the Wisconsin, the ship was eventually sold back to its original owner, Goodrich Transportation Company, and in 1924 it was given back its original name. In the late afternoon of October 28, 1929, Captain Dougal Morrison struggled to make an important decision. Should he take his ship, the SS Wisconsin, out of its safe harbor in Chicago into what was shaping up to be a particularly vicious storm on Lake Michigan, or should he follow the leads of other captains who were keeping their ships in and waiting out the bad weather? It was not an easy decision to reach. Morrison was well aware of the price the forces of nature could exact on ships. Only a week earlier, Morrison's friend, Captain Robert Mackay, had gone down with his ship, the Milwaukee, in a similar storm. Mackay had the reputation of being one of the finest commanders on the lake. Ironically, he had been the first mate on the Naomi and had been singled out for his heroism during its fire. But even Mackay's experience and knowledge failed to serve him when he was trapped in what was becoming a series of killer storms on Lake Michigan in 1929. Morrison had also been out on the lake during that storm the week before, and the Wisconsin had endured it admirably. Captain Morrison must have weighed this history along with the fact that the Wisconsin was one of the more durable ships on the lake when he was trying to reach his decision. There were other factors to consider as well. From a business standpoint, time meant money, and storms on the lake were known to take a week or more to settle. This, of course, would never take precedence over the safety of a ship's crew. But Captain Morrison had to feel confident about his chances. The Wisconsin had undergone 2 rigorous inspections in the preceding month and had passed both with flying colors. The journey promised to be a trying one. Strong gale-force winds howled across the lake, producing waves of over 20 feet, accompanied by heavy rain. Sailing on the open sea was impossible, and even staying close to shore meant taking the full force of a storm that would be blowing directly at him. Neither Morrison nor his crew could have relished sailing under these conditions, and we'll never know Morrison's exact final reasoning in his decision to take the Wisconsin out on the lake from the safety of the Chicago harbor. But for whatever reasons, Wisconsin departed from Chicago in the early evening of October 28th. Its destination was Milwaukee. The storm rocked the Wisconsin back and forth in the water. Anything not nailed down was tossed about the ship, and even the heavy cargo that had been secured for the journey was torn loose and slammed against the ship's holds. Still, the Wisconsin weathered the storm and edged northward, taking a tremendous battering along the way. Shortly after midnight, the punishment by nature began to take its toll. At 1 o'clock, the Wisconsin's chief engineer reported that the ship had sprung a leak, probably as a result of the huge crates of iron castings slamming against the iron plates of the Wisconsin's hull. It was a serious leak, and Captain Morrison ordered the pumps to be put to immediate use. They didn't help. By 1:30 a.m., the water was knee-deep in the fire hold. The ship was listing from the shifting cargo, and the Wisconsin was just north of the Illinois border, about 5 miles from Kenosha, Wisconsin, when Morrison sent his first distress message, the first of many. In face of such a storm, quick assistance would be difficult to obtain. Captain Morrison knew that smaller boats wouldn't be able to fight the elements, and even the larger craft would have to struggle on their hands at best. It would take a long time for help to arrive. The struggle on board the Wisconsin raged on. Water continued to rise in the fire holds, and when it reached a depth of 15 feet, the ship lost its power. The Wisconsin was now paralyzed and in total darkness. Panic-stricken crew members rushed about, awaiting orders to launch the lifeboats. Captain Morrison stayed with it for as long as he could, hoping against hope to save the ship, awaiting the rescue vessels he had been assured hours earlier. And they were on the way. The storm showed no sign of letting up. Captain Morrison's pleas for help became more and more urgent, until finally at 4:32 a.m. he issued the order to abandon ship. He had also ordered that the ship's anchors be dropped, and with no power to bring them up again, the towing of the Wisconsin was now an impossibility. In effect, Morrison had written off the ship and was now busy trying to save the lives of his crew. It was truly a race against time. The Wisconsin had struggled nobly for hours, but by the time Morrison wired shore with the message that he was abandoning ship, the Wisconsin's stern was virtually submerged in the water, and the vessel was listing so badly to the port side that the starboard lifeboats were rendered useless. The storm had blown away portions of the Wisconsin superstructure, and the foaming water was littered with debris. It was bedlam aboard the Wisconsin now. Captain Morrison watched members of his crew frantically lowering lifeboats, some panicking when they noted that there weren't enough boats to go around, and jumping with life rafts into the sea. By that time, Coast Guard cutters from Kenosha and Racine were arriving at the scene and were picking up as many as they could find and fit in their boats. Some now, perhaps in final testament to its durability, the Wisconsin managed to stay afloat until shortly after daybreak. Although by 7 o'clock it had rolled onto its port side, waves had wiped out the rest of the superstructure. The struggle ended at approximately 7:10 a.m. when the SS Wisconsin, the once proud freighter, slid astern first beneath the waves, now a part of Lake Michigan legend. One final note. In a time of heroism, when rescuers put their own safety on the line in assisting the crew of the Wisconsin, the actions of one particular group of men stand out as especially meritorious. The Search, a small fishing tug owned by the Chambers brothers, set out from Kenosha Harbor to help with the rescue operations as soon as its crew heard of the Wisconsin's plight. Just getting to the scene was a yeoman task for the tiny vessel, but it stayed at the site well after the Wisconsin had gone down, dodging debris and picking up survivors from the water. The Coast Guard cutters had picked up the men from the lifeboats, as well as some of those in the water, but they were too overloaded to take all of the men in the lake if it weren't for the efforts of the men aboard the Search. The death toll from Wisconsin would have been much higher, as is often the case in times of tragedy. Unlikely heroes are born to be remembered as long as history repeats their story.
I heard that the Wisconsin was in trouble out there on the lake, and so I rode down on 75th, the end of 75th Street, and I could see the boat out there, and already then the stern had sunk below the surface, and I waited a while, maybe an hour or two, and the complete boat sunk. Then the following morning, I rode down along the beach, and there was a sandbank about 4 feet high all the way along the lake, and in the debris that came off the boat, evidently, I found 2 life preservers marked the SS Wisconsin, and I put them on my handlebars, rode home.
The waves were coming over the North Pier, and they were coming over the South Pier. They were rough. That was terrible. We had a little rain shower in there, and that, coming in. And so on the way home, I heard that then the Chamber brothers, a fishing tug, and they had a fish market on the north end of the bridge, and they were ready to go, a brand new steel tug, and the Coast Guards were out already. They were on and them waves were rough, and even one Coast Guard took a chew he swallowed. Coast Guards was the first ones in, and when they came in, we were perched up there. We had the most picture of the Coast Guard boat, where the survivors and all them were laying in the bottom. It was tragedy. There was ambulances right around there, and they took care of them. They shipped them to Kenosha Hospital, St. Catharines, and things were under control pretty good. And then Chambers, the fishing tug, came in, and one fella, it was so rough out there, they hated to get off of that floating raft they were on. And this Clinton Young and them, they went down and jumped on that raft in that sea, and they pulled them survivors and threw them in the Chambers boat. And they came back in over there, and they got them, and they were so happy.
In 1929, I was going to Kenosha High School. And there had been talk around the school that day about the casualties from the Wisconsin being laid out in the Kenosha City morgue, which was located in the basement of the county courthouse. The courthouse being only a block away from high school, I thought I would take a walk in and see what I could see that day. I walked into the basement aisle, and because the morgue was overflowing, apparently, I walked down the aisle, and many bodies were laid out down there on tables covered with sheets. One body was an enormous man, heavy and big, and I heard later that he was the captain. The following day, I took a walk along South Kenosha Beach, seeing what kind of debris would have been washed up, and I found about a 16-foot oar off of one of their lifeboats, which I took home and we kept home for many, many years.
The Wisconsin's final resting place is in about 125 feet of water, 5 miles off the Kenosha shoreline. The ship came to rest facing north in an upright position after the ship sank. Its exact location was unknown for several years, and it was discovered only after local fishermen hired a diver to find what was snagging their nets. What the diver found was a wreck that has intrigued divers ever since. Most of the Wisconsin's decking is gone, and it lost its cabins to the storm and the process of sinking. Its smokestack sits lengthwise on what remains of the deck. Shortly after it was located, efforts were made to salvage the wreckage. But once it was determined that the Wisconsin could not be salvaged, the site became a diver's delight, a place of history and legend, a place for exploration. In the darkness lies a world of her own. Like a hidden tomb, the Wisconsin is well protected by the cold, murky water and currents that sweep across the hull. The deck on which people walk is now occupied by marine life. The heavy capstan that once revolved cable is a spindle resting toward the bow. Bollards to tie mooring lines sit empty. An old port glass window lays still. The davit with an aquatic visitor in its ring, a freshwater burbot, nicknamed a lawyer fish. Now descending along her port side. Her mammoth anchor chains head off to infinity. Her double-plated iron hull, now connected to the sandy clay base of the lake herself. The diver explores one of the many openings on the deck to temporarily retrieve a glass bowl. In the ship's front holds, the windlass, used to raise and lower the vessel's two massive anchors. Mooring line still in place where her crew left it. The diver finds a shot glass and leaves it on her deck. A brass porthole housing. Diver tosses a shoe about the ship's holds. The grill of the old Mercury tractor used to transport cargo around the ship. A corner sink lays on a debris field. The ship's rear capstan. One of the ship's main support beams. Crates of unknown cargo. Old saws. Gallons of paint. What looks like a car battery is a Morse code transmitter radio. Examining one of the ship's dynamited blowouts, jagged, twisted plates of raw iron plating. This was done in the 1930s during the early salvage of the vessel.
How's the visibility?
Not too bad. It's better on the stern than the bow. The stern's coming real fast across the back.
Oh yeah?
It's coming across the ship so fast it's actually sterned up.
The stern is kind of spooky.
The diver's now over her rear decking, several feet thick clay mound. When she sank, landed stern first and scooped the lake's clay bottom like a spoonful of ice cream. Descending over her rear deck, the divers seek her huge propeller wedged in the lake's bottom. Remains of the rudder and cracked hull. A lake perch naps unaffected by the diver's bright lights. Back over the stern's deck, some cattle fencing still in place. A door with its windows smashed. In the engine room, a look at her large steam engine with a light bulb still in one piece. The mighty connecting rods used to turn her screw. A large oak chair. Some of the engine room's gauges. A gas engine generator. A window housing with broken glass. A beautiful look at her ornate woodwork. A nosy lawyerfish sneaks a peek at the camera. a 1929 antique automobile. The ship's manifest said to be carrying such cars as Packards, Chevys, and Essex. The diver explores the depth of the smokestack. Crated panes of glass. The diver locates a plate with the Goodrich Steam Lines logo still painted on it. It's now time for the long ascent to the surface. After an extended deep water dive, the divers have to pay the price in decompression to safely return.
Oh, what a nice dive. Woo. Beautiful. Beautiful. Water's about 40, 41 on the bottom. Just enough to keep it from getting hot.
Today, over 6 decades after the Wisconsin lost its fierce battle with the ruthless rolling waves of Lake Michigan, many questions remain unanswered. Why, for instance, did Captain Dougal Morrison elect to sail in what was certain to be a trying, if not life-threatening, storm on the lake? It had been a season of vicious storms on Lake Michigan, and only a week earlier, the lake had claimed the Milwaukee, considered at the time to be the finest car ferry in the world, along with its highly regarded captain and crew. There had been other maritime disasters that season as well. Why did Captain Morrison choose to ignore history and defy the elements when he just as easily could have waited for the storm to run its course and sail a few days later out of Chicago's harbor? And why, once he had realized his ship's peril, did Morrison take some of the courses of action that he did? Why did he order the dropping of the ship's 2 massive anchors, knowing full well that without steam there was no way to raise them again? His distress calls had been answered and help was on the way. How could he have expected the rescue ships to tow his ship with his anchors down? There are so many questions. Why didn't Morrison head for the Kenosha port as soon as he knew his ship was in grave danger? He was only an hour from shore, but instead of moving the doomed ship toward land, he stayed at sea, waiting for assistance, helplessly watching the lake batter his vessel and fill its depths. Or if he had judged that he could not make it safely to shore, why didn't the Wisconsin's captain attempt to beach the ship and wait until help arrived? This maneuver had been successfully executed by other ships in similar circumstances. No one would ever hear the answers to these and other questions from Captain Morrison himself. Even though he was pulled alive but bruised and bleeding from Lake Michigan, Morrison died of exposure before he had the opportunity to explain or defend his decisions. Even Morrison's death had its own peculiar drama, which is now a part of the SS Wisconsin lore. According to the popular story, Morrison, along with other officers, refused to board any of the rafts that were making their way toward the rescue vessels in that area. These men wound up in the water when the Wisconsin sank. And incredibly, all but one were still alive when the Coast Guard pulled them to safety. Captain Morrison had suffered extensive injuries and was unconscious when he was rescued, and all efforts to revive him ended in failure. With virtually no pulse and having lost a great volume of blood, Morrison was written off for dead. Almost miraculously, however, the captain regained consciousness just before the Coast Guard cutter reached shore. Not only had he come around, but he appeared to have made an astonishing recovery. As the ship docked at the Kenosha harbor, Captain Morrison worked his way from man to man, shaking hands and thanking each person who assisted in the rescue mission. As soon as he had finished this task, he collapsed again. He died as he was being lifted into an ambulance. Controversy raced over the unanswered questions. A formal investigation into the ship's sinking was launched by the federal government, Kenosha County, and the owners of Wisconsin. No decisive conclusions were reached, although the families of those lost at sea were awarded fair amounts of money in settlement of their suits against Goodrich Company. However, never was it proven in or out of court that Captain Morrison and his crew were negligent in their handling of the ship. All that remains is speculation. It is believed, for instance, that Morrison's decision to sail was highly influenced by the good marks that Wisconsin had received in its inspection 2 weeks earlier. That, along with the ship's sturdy construction and illustrious history of performance under all kinds of circumstances, must have convinced Captain Morrison that he was never taking an extraordinary risk, and certainly a life-threatening one, when he decided to sail out of the Chicago harbor on that fateful October 28th evening. To his credit, Morrison used his wireless as soon as he felt the Wisconsin was in danger. Nearly 3 hours before he issued his abandoned ship order, in fact, unlike the Milwaukee, which was not equipped with wireless and may have suffered its huge losses due to a lack of contact with would-be rescuers, Morrison was in a position to maintain communication with radio marine stations. According to the logs, Morrison sent at least 13 messages requesting assistance, and he was assured as early as a half hour after the initial contact that help was on the way. Perhaps this assurance affected the decisions that Captain Morrison made in handling the ship. Heading toward land, especially in the grips of a raging nor'easter, was not as safe or logical an alternative as some of Morrison's critics suggested. If the ship, pitching out of control in high winds and waves, had struck bottom before it had safely docked, as had occurred to other ships before, there was danger of it shearing off into the piers and still being stranded offshore. Loss of life was likely. Nor was grounding the ship necessarily the answer. If the Wisconsin, which had already taken on a large amount of water and was listing badly in the sea, was beached too far from shore, the lake could have easily dismantled it before help arrived. Captain Morrison probably felt that it was safer to stay put and wait for help to arrive, and he only ordered the anchors dropped as a last resort when all seemed lost, and the lowered anchors would have helped stabilize the ship for the launching of the lifeboats. But all of this, of course, is conjecture, and it too has become part of the legend of the Wisconsin. A legend that at times is as still as calm water on a quiet summer day, and at other times repeated in excited tones as tempestuous as the stormy waters of the lake itself. The source of the legend remains on the floor of the lake, in dark, cold, murky water where it settled over 60 years ago. It rests as a silent testament to the fury of Lake Michigan, to the never-ending battle between humans and nature. It is a part of a past that will continue to intrigue historians and divers alike. It is now a part of the lake itself.